We've been hearing some very strong language from the Pope this Thursday, calling for, quote, concrete measures against child abuse. But are victims, one of which we just heard from in that report, right to be sceptical here?
Well, I think, this is a significant meeting. It's the first of its kind that we've seen in the global church. But at the same time, I think the Vatican officials have been careful to emphasize that this is a step in a long road that the church has been taking. In general, I think the church has been a slow learner in relation to child protection, and it has kind of acknowledged that in some of the documents associated with the meeting. So it is a turning point in the sense that it's the first of its kind, but I think it's important not to overstate its significance. As I said, it's a step along the road, so it has set itself relatively modest goals, I think, to raise awareness in the global church. So it's very much about awareness raising, especially in national churches that don't have the same experience of the crisis as some of the churches in the Western world have, like in Canada, in America, in Ireland, and some countries in Western Europe. So I think it's also important to say that it's a test to some extent of the Francis papacy.
We'll come back to that. I do want to focus on the summit itself for now, because, of course, you mentioned that this is a step in a long road. But I want to talk about the so-called concrete measures that are being taken here, because as we heard from that victim in that report, some of the priests that are accused of molesting the children are simply being moved to other parishes where they're also in contact with other children. What are the actual measures being taken here?
Well, I think part of the purpose of the meeting is to try to establish some global norms around how church elites should respond to the abuse crisis. So I think that would be one kind of concrete measure, if it's possible to do that. So and I think what's significant here is that a lot of churches in Western Europe will be able to share their experiences with other national churches in the global church that are, as I said, less experienced in this area. So there's churches like in Ireland, the church in America will be able to share the resources around healing for survival.
I think it's lovely to say that this is very much about sharing experiences and communication, but I think what we're hearing from some critics is that one of the main issues is that among those attending, we have the likes of Indian Cardinal, of course, Oswald Gracias, who was also forced to admit that he failed to act immediately on sex abuse allegations under his watch. So we have church leaders at that conference who are undeniably part of the problem.
Yeah, so, I mean, what is significant about this meeting is that it's putting the spotlight for the first time on the leadership crisis in the church. So the scandal around sex abuse in the Catholic Church, it began as an abuse crisis. So about how children were abused, and then it has developed into a leadership crisis. In other words, about how church elites have responded or not to the problem. And one of the difficulties is for the church in dealing with this problem and responding to this leadership crisis is just the sheer diversity in the church. It's present in almost every country in the world. It's difficult to establish some kind of general procedures that can apply in every single national context. So that's a big challenge for the Catholic Church as a global religious system. How can it actually embed global norms that apply and are relevant to lots of specific national contexts? So this is a kind of a challenge for the Church in responding to this leadership crisis.
Now, Brian Conway, I want to go back to a point that you just made earlier. There's certainly no denying that this is one of the most critical points of Francis's papacy. If he does tackle this, it could be pivotal to his legacy. But if it doesn't, surely it's just more of the same. This is a 3 decades old problem.
Yes, so the Church, even acknowledges itself that it has been a slow learner in dealing with this problem.
I think there's something so offensive about this expression, slow learner, for the victims, isn't it? 3 decades of this sexual abuse scandal going on across from Latin America to Europe, a slow learner?
Yes, the Church has been a slow learner. It hasn't been quick to address this problem, and that's part of the issue. I mean, it is too long. The Church has spent too long grappling with this issue. As you mentioned, it's been unfolding over several decades, and that is too long to address this type of crisis. But at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's difficult for the church, given the scale of its presence in the world, to come up with global norms to tackle this problem, because it's different in different parts of the world, and different parts of the world have had different experiences. So the church's experience in general is very uneven in relation to this issue. So that's why I think it's kind of difficult for this meeting alone to be the kind of silver bullet answer to the problem. And I think it's more kind of important to recognise that it's a step along the road to developing an adequate response to the abuse crisis in the church.
Brian Conway, I think lecturer at Maynooth University, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, of course, making a point that this summit is, as you said, a step in a potentially very long road for the Catholic Church. Thank you so much for your insight here on France 24.